In the winter of 1891, a 17-year-old girl bought a cave for $20. The whole town laughed. Worthless land, they said. Foolish girl, they said. She will die in that hole before spring. She did not die. She built something that would outlast them all. This is not simply a story about survival. This is a story about what happens when the world tells you that you are nothing and you decide to prove them wrong. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with patience, with work, and with knowledge passed down through generations of women who refuse to be forgotten. The Whitmore cabin sat 3 miles east of the town of Bitter Creek, Montana. It was a small structure, built with love rather than skill, and it had been home to 4 souls who asked for nothing more than each other. Thomas Whitmore was a miner. His hands were rough as sandstone, his back bent from years of crawling through darkness, but his heart was gentle. He had come west from Pennsylvania with nothing but a pickaxe and a dream, and somewhere along the way, he had found something more valuable than any gold. Her name was Margaret. Margaret Blackwood had been born into wealth. Her father, Ezra Blackwood, owned more land than any man in the territory. He had cattle by the thousands, ranch hands by the dozens, and a daughter he loved with a possessive, controlling kind of devotion. When Margaret announced that she intended to marry a penniless miner, Ezra gave her a choice: the family fortune or the man she loved. Margaret chose love. She walked away from the Blackwood mansion with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small leather journal that had belonged to her grandmother. Ezra disowned her that same day. He told everyone in town that his daughter was dead to him, and for 18 years he kept that promise. Margaret never regretted her choice. Once she and Thomas built their cabin together, log by log, and filled it with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. They had 2 children. Elara came first, a girl with her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubborn will. Then Silas 4 years later, a quiet boy who preferred books to roughhousing and asked questions that made grown men pause. Life was hard, but it was good. Margaret taught her children everything she knew. She had grown up hearing stories from her grandmother, who had come to America from Cornwall, England. Cornwall was a land of ancient tin mines, where families had lived in cave dwellings for generations, surviving winters that would kill anyone unprepared. Margaret's grandmother had taught her the old ways: how to read the stone, how to find water in rock, how to use the earth itself as shelter. "Stone is your friend," Margaret would tell her children on cold winter nights. "Oh, stone holds warmth when the air turns to ice. Stone holds cool when the summer burns. Your great-great-grandmother survived storms that killed entire villages, all because she understood what the rock could give her." These lessons seemed like fairy tales in the warmth of the cabin. They would not seem like fairy tales for long. Thomas died on the 7th of January, 1891. The mine collapse happened without warning. One moment, 3 men were working a new shaft. The next moment, there was only silence and settling dust. They recovered Thomas's body 4 days later. His face was peaceful, the other miners said, like he was sleeping. Elara did not believe them. Margaret took her husband's death the way she took everything, quietly. She did not weep at the funeral. She did not collapse. She simply grew thinner, paler, more transparent, as if grief were slowly erasing her from the world. The cough started 2 weeks later. The doctor called it pneumonia. He said it happened sometimes when sorrow settled too deep in the lungs. He gave Margaret medicine and told the children to keep her warm, but everyone could see the truth. Margaret Whitmore was dying of a broken heart. She held on for 2 months. In those final weeks, Margaret gathered her children close and told them stories. Not fairy tales, not happy endings, survival stories. She told them about the tin mines of Cornwall, where her grandmother's family had weathered storms that lasted weeks. She told them about the caves, where the temperature never changed, where water seeped through limestone and collected in pools as clear as glass. And she told them about the land. Thomas had discovered it 2 years earlier, a parcel of worthless rock and scrub land that nobody wanted. But Thomas had seen something others missed: a cave, not a shallow indent, but a true cavern, deep and dry, or carved by water over thousands of years. He had wanted to buy it, to build something there, a home that could withstand anything. He never got the chance. Margaret pressed her grandmother's journal into Alara's hands on the last night of her life. The pages were filled with drawings, diagrams, and notes written in a cramped hand. Water collection systems, stone construction techniques, temperature readings from caves in Cornwall dating back 60 years. This knowledge kept our family alive for generations. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. It will keep you alive too. Promise me, Alara. Promise me you will take care of your brother. I promise, Mama. Margaret died before dawn. Alara buried her mother next to her father in the small cemetery behind the church. Silas stood beside her, silent. He had not spoken a single word since Margaret's death. The boy who had once asked 100 questions a day now moved through the world like a ghost, his eyes empty, his face blank. The minister said words that meant nothing. The townspeople offered condolences that felt like dust. And when it was over, Alara took her brother's hand and led him to the only place they had left to go. The Blackwood Ranch sat 5 miles north of town. It was an empire of wood and stone, with a main house that had more rooms than Alara could count. Cattle dotted the hills like brown and white stones. Ranch hands moved about their work, tipping their hats to the 2 children who walked up the long dirt road. Ezra Blackwood met them on the porch. He was 65 years old, but he stood straight as an oak tree. His hair had gone white, but his eyes were dark and hard as coal. He looked at Alara and Silas the way a man might look at stray dogs that had wandered onto his property. Alara spoke clearly, though her heart was pounding. We are your grandchildren. Our mother was your daughter, Margaret. She died 3 days ago. We have nowhere else to go. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Ezra's face did not change. His eyes moved from Alara to Silas and back again. Something flickered there, something that might have been recognition or pain. But it was gone so quickly that Alara wondered if she had imagined it. His voice was ice. My daughter died 18 years ago, the day she walked out that door. You are not my grandchildren. You are nothing to me. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He threw it at Alara's feet. The coins inside clinked dully against each other. $35. That is every cent you will ever receive from me. Take it and leave. Do not come back. Alara did not move. She looked at this man, this wealthy, powerful man who had abandoned his own daughter for the crime of falling in love. She looked at his fine clothes and his massive house and his empire of cattle. And she understood something that would carry her through every hardship to come. He was afraid of what she represented, afraid of the memory of the daughter he had lost, afraid of being wrong. Alara picked up the pouch. She did not thank him. She did not argue. She simply turned and walked away, Silas's hand still gripped in hers. Behind her, she heard the door slam shut. She did not look back. Pause and reflect. 2 orphans, a grandfather who threw money at their feet like they were beggars, $35 and nowhere to go. Most people would have given up right there. Most people would have found work as servants or begged for charity or simply waited to die. But Alara was not most people. She had a promise to keep. The auction was held on a Tuesday afternoon in the town hall of Bitter Creek. It was a small affair, mostly forgotten parcels that nobody wanted, tax seizures, abandoned claims, land so worthless that even speculators passed it by. Alara stood at the back of the room. Silas pressed close to her side. Their dog, Flint, waited outside, tied to the hitching post. Flint was a sheepdog, gray and white, with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. He had been their father's dog first, then the whole family's. Now he was all they had left of the life before. The auctioneer was a sweaty man with a voice like gravel. He moved through the lots quickly, and barely pausing for bids that rarely came. Then he reached Lot 17, 160 acres of limestone and scrub. The auctioneer wiped his brow. Known locally as Hemlock's Folly, features a sizable cave system. Starting bid, $20. Laughter rippled through the room. Hemlock's Folly was famous in Bitter Creek, but not for good reasons. Old man Hemlock had bought the land 40 years ago, convinced he would find silver in the cave. He spent 15 years digging, found nothing, and died broke. Since then, the land had changed hands 3 times and every owner had eventually walked away, defeated by the useless rock and thin soil. Nobody raised their hand. The auctioneer shrugged. No interest. Well, moving on to $20. Every head in the room turned. Elora stood perfectly still, her hand raised. She was small for her age, thin from grief and hunger, dressed in a plain wool dress that had belonged to her mother. She did not look like a bidder. She looked like a lost child who had wandered into the wrong building. The auctioneer squinted at her. The Whitmore girl? Did you say $20? She nodded once. Silence. Then the laughter started, louder than before. Men elbowed each other. Women whispered behind their hands. Someone in the back row pointed openly. In the front row, Ezra Blackwood turned around in his seat. His face was a mask of contempt. He did not speak, but his expression said everything. Look at her. She look at this foolish child buying a hole in the ground. She will fail. She will come crawling back. And I will be proven right. A voice called out from the crowd. What are you going to do with a rock pile, girl? Raise stones? More laughter. Ilara did not respond. She did not smile. She did not flinch. She simply stood there, waiting, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the auctioneer. The gavel came down, sold to the young lady for $20. Ilara walked forward. The crowd parted for her, still chuckling, still shaking their heads. She counted out the coins carefully. $20 from her mother's burial fund, more than half of everything she had in the world. The clerk handed her the deed, a single sheet of paper that felt both flimsy and impossibly heavy. She walked out of the town hall without looking at anyone. Silas followed, silent as a shadow. Flint rose from his spot by the hitching post, tail wagging, as if he somehow knew that something important had just happened. The three of them set off down the road, toward a piece of land that everyone said was worthless. Everyone except Margaret Whitmore, and now her daughter. The walk to Hemlock's Folly took 3 hours. The road turned to trail, and the trail turned to nothing but scrub and pale, jutting rock. The land rose and fell in gentle waves, dotted with hardy brush that had learned to survive on almost no water. It was harsh. It was unforgiving. It was beautiful. Ilara stopped at the crest of a small hill and looked down at her inheritance. The cave mouth gaped from the base of a low mesa, a dark opening perhaps 20 feet wide and 12 feet high. It looked like a wound in the earth, a doorway to somewhere else. The area around it was scattered with the remnants of Old Man Hemlock's failed mining operation. Rotted timber, rusted equipment, the skeleton of a wheelbarrow. But beyond the debris, Ilara saw what others had missed. Flat ground near the entrance, perfect for building, a slope that would shed rain away from the cave mouth. South-facing exposure that would catch the winter sun, and the cave itself, that vast dark space that her mother had described in whispered words during her final days. Dry as a bone and deep as a secret, Margaret had said. That is what your father told me, a fortress built by time itself. Elora looked at Silas. The boy stood beside her, his face blank, when his eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the cave. He had not spoken in 2 months. The doctor had called it shock, said he would recover in time, but Ilara was not sure. She had watched her brother retreat into himself day by day until the boy she knew seemed to have vanished entirely. She squeezed his hand. This is home now, she said quietly. We are going to be all right. Silas did not respond, but he did not pull away. That first night, they did not go inside the cave. And Ilara built a small fire just outside the entrance, using dry brush and dead wood from Hemlock's abandoned camp. The flames pushed back the enormous darkness, creating a small circle of warmth in the vast Montana wilderness. She had brought a bedroll, a small sack of flour, an iron skillet, and her mother's journal. These were their total possessions. Everything else had been sold to pay for the burial. Flint curled up beside them, his warm body a comfort against the chill. Above them, and the stars blazed in a canopy of cold light. Ilara had never seen so many. In town, the lamps dimmed the sky. Out here, there was nothing between them and the infinite. She thought about her parents, about the life they had built and lost, about the grandfather who had thrown money at her feet like she was a beggar. Anger flickered in her chest, hot and sharp, but she pushed it down. Anger would not build shelter. Anger would not keep them alive through the winter. Only work would do that. Hanoa, she pulled out her mother's journal and began to read by firelight. The pages were filled with her great-grandmother's knowledge. Water collection, stone construction, temperature patterns in underground spaces. There were diagrams of caves in Cornwall, with notations about how families had survived winters that killed everyone above ground. One passage caught her eye. The earth holds its warmth. While the air above freezes and thaws with the seasons, the stone below remains constant. While a cave at 50 feet deep will stay the same temperature in winter and summer alike. This is not magic. This is the gift of the earth to those wise enough to accept it. Elara closed the journal and looked at the dark mouth of the cave. Tomorrow she would claim her strange inheritance. Tonight she would rest. Dawn came gray and cold. Elara left Silas and Flint at the entrance and ventured into the cave alone, a lit lantern held high. The air inside was cool and still, smelling of damp stone and ancient dust. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space. The entrance chamber was enormous, far larger than the cabin she had grown up in. The ceiling arched above her like a cathedral, smooth limestone worn by millennia of slow water. The floor was mostly level, a mix of packed earth and smooth rock, sloping gently upward toward the back. She walked deeper. 100 yards. 200. The chamber narrowed gradually, branching into smaller passages that disappeared into darkness. But the main space remained open, walkable, dry. Her mother had been right. No bats, no dampness, no dripping water or treacherous footing. Just stone, silent and waiting, millions of years old. Elara stood in the center of the cavern and turned in a slow circle. The temperature was noticeably warmer than outside, even though she was now far from the entrance. She held up her lantern and studied the walls. Smooth limestone, pale gray with veins of darker rock running through it. Beautiful, in a stark and ancient way. This would work. This would actually work. The first priority was the sheep. Elara knew that her future depended on livestock. Sheep could survive on scrub grass and thin forage. They provided wool for clothing and trade, milk for drinking, meat when necessary. A small flock could grow into a larger flock. A larger flock could mean survival. She spent $12 on 10 sheep from a farmer 3 miles away. It was almost everything she had left. The farmer looked at her with a mixture of pity and confusion. "You are taking them to Hemlock's Folly? What are you going to do? Teach them to eat rocks?" Elara did not answer. She drove the sheep back to the cave, Flint helping to keep them together with the instincts bred into him through generations, and penned them temporarily in a rough enclosure of brush and fallen timber. Then she began the real work, building a proper sheep pen inside the cave. The labor was brutal. The nearest usable timber stood 3 miles away, a stand of pine and spruce that had somehow survived the cattle grazing that had stripped most of the land bare. Elara spent entire days felling young, straight trees with her small axe. Each swing sent shocks through her arms. Each tree was a battle. Once felled, she trimmed the branches and dragged the logs back to the cave, one by one. Her shoulders burning, her hands raw. Silas helped as much as he could. He could not swing an axe, but he could carry branches and hold tools and fetch water from the creek a mile away. Something in his eyes had changed. He was present again, watching, learning, even if words remained trapped somewhere deep inside him. Days blurred into weeks. Haul, measure, saw, position. Elara used a hand drill to bore holes in the logs, lashing them together with rope where she could not use her precious few nails. She dug post holes into the packed earth of the cave floor, using the sharp edge of a flat rock when her shovel failed against the compacted ground. Her hands cracked and bled. Calluses formed over blisters. Her muscles screamed every morning, and every morning she forced herself to continue. Slowly, a sturdy wooden enclosure took shape in the cavern's gloom. It looked small against the immense stone walls, a testament to human effort in a place carved by geology over countless millennia. But it was solid. It was secure. On the 12th day, Elara herded the sheep inside. They huddled together, their soft bleating swallowed by the vastness of the cave. But they were safe. No predator could reach them here. No blizzard could freeze them. That night, Elara sat by her fire, her body aching with a deep, satisfying exhaustion. She watched the sheep in their new home, and for the first time since her parents died, she felt something other than grief. She felt hope. The sheep were safe, but survival demanded more. The daily trek to the creek for water consumed hours that Alara could not afford. Carrying buckets back and forth, mile after mile, exhausted her body and stole time from other essential work. Winter would make the journey treacherous, if not impossible. Ice would form. Snow would drift. The path would become a death trap. She needed water inside the cave. The answer came from the stone itself. Alara had noticed it during her first explorations. A specific section of the limestone wall, near the back of the main chamber, behaved differently than the rest. After rain, or on humid mornings, the stone would weep. Moisture beaded on the surface, gathered into tiny rivulets, and traced ancient paths down the rock face before disappearing into the dusty floor. It was a slow process, almost imperceptible, but it was consistent. Her mother's journal confirmed what she suspected. Limestone is a living stone, the old handwriting said. It breathes, it drinks rain, and releases it slowly, over days and weeks. A weeping wall can fill a barrel if you know how to catch what it offers. Alara made a plan. Her next trip to town was calculated carefully. She walked the 3 miles to Bitter Creek with Flint at her heels, the morning frost crunching under her boots. The town was just waking up, our smoke rising from chimneys, horses stamping in the cold. She went to Tully's general store. Marcus Tully was a heavy-set man with small eyes and a permanent expression of mild suspicion. He ran the only general store in town, which meant he ran the hub of all commerce and gossip. Nothing happened in Bitter Creek that Marcus Tully did not hear about within the hour. He looked at Alara with undisguised curiosity as she entered. "The cave girl," he said, leaning on the counter. "I heard you were still out there. Figured the wolves would have gotten you by now." Alara ignored the comment. "I need a large barrel, the biggest you have, and some lengths of tin." Tully raised an eyebrow. "A barrel? For that rock pile of yours?" He snorted. "What are you planning, catching the rain before it hits the ground?" "Something like that." He quoted a price that made her stomach clench. $6, nearly half of what she had left. She hesitated. A voice spoke from behind her. "Put it on my account, Marcus." Alara turned. A woman stood in the doorway, perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. She was dressed simply but cleanly, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived much. Cordelia Briggs owned the dress shop 2 doors down. She was a widow, like so many women in this hard country. And she had a reputation for fairness and generosity that had survived decades of frontier hardship. "Mrs. Briggs," Alara started. Cordelia held up a hand. "Your mother helped me once, many years ago, before you were born. I owed her a debt I could never repay." She looked at Alara with something like recognition. "You have her eyes, and her stubbornness. Now take what you need and do not argue with me." Alara felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she managed. Cordelia nodded once, then turned and left without another word. Marcus Tully watched the exchange with interest, already calculating how quickly this story would spread through town. He loaded the barrel onto a small cart and added the tin sheets, shaking his head the whole time. "Good luck," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You are going to need it." Getting the barrel back to the cave was an ordeal. Alara had to roll it end over end across the rough terrain, the hollow booming sound announcing her slow progress to every animal within a mile. Every muscle in her body protested. Every rock and rut seemed designed specifically to stop her, but she did not stop. At the cave, she set to work immediately. Using her axe, she carefully split leftover logs, hollowing them out to create crude but functional gutters. She nailed them to the weeping wall at careful angles, using the precious few nails she had hoarded. The strips of tin were bent to bridge the gaps, channeling any stray drops. At the bottom of this makeshift system, she placed the large oak barrel. It looked absurd, a piece of civilization incongruously placed in a prehistoric space. Silas watched her work with more attention than he had shown anything since their parents died. His eyes tracked every movement. He handed her tools before she asked for them. He held the gutters in place while she hammered. For 2 days, nothing happened. Nah, the wall remained dry. The barrel remained empty. Ilara checked it every few hours, hope fading a little more each time. Had she wasted Mrs. Briggs's kindness on a fool's dream? On the third morning she heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound, so faint she thought she had imagined it. Plink. She rushed to the back of the cave, lantern swinging. Plink. A single clear drop of water fell from her gutter into the barrel. Plink. Then another. Alara stood perfectly still, watching. The drops fell slowly, agonizingly slowly, perhaps one every few seconds. But they fell. They accumulated. A tiny pool of water formed at the bottom of the barrel, catching the lantern light like liquid crystal. She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since her mother died. The sound echoed in the vast chamber, bouncing off stone walls that had stood for millions of years. Flint barked, confused but happy. And behind her, Alara heard something that stopped her heart. Silas was laughing too. It was rusty, unpracticed, barely more than a breath. But it was real. He stood near the barrel, one hand reaching toward the water, his thin face transformed by a smile. That slow, steady drip was more than water. It was the rhythm of survival, a promise of self-sufficiency earned not with money or power, but with observation and patience, and the ancient knowledge her mother had passed down. The cave was providing. Water from stone. It sounds impossible. But there it was, dripping into the barrel, yam one drop at a time. Her mother's knowledge passed down through generations was proving true. She had spent almost everything, $12 on sheep, $6 on the barrel. She had perhaps $2 left, a pen full of animals, and winter coming fast. But she also had something money could not buy, proof that her plan was working. The question was whether it would be enough. Autumn deepened. The first frost arrived like a thief in the night. We're leaving delicate silver lace on the scrub brush outside the cave. The air grew sharp and thin. The sheep huddled closer together. And Alara knew that the true test was coming. The main cavern, vast as it was, would not be warm enough for them to live in through the winter. Heat would dissipate into that enormous space, lost to stone that had been cold since the beginning of time. She needed something smaller, something defensible against the deep freeze that was coming. She needed to build a cabin inside the cave. The location was crucial. She chose a spot near the back, not far from her water system, where the cave wall was relatively smooth and the ceiling dipped lower. Here the stone created a natural alcove, a smaller space within the larger chamber. The work began again. More trees, more hauling, more sawing until her arms felt like they would fall off. But this time was different. This time, she was not building for the sheep. She was building for herself and Silas. She was building a home. The walls went up slowly. Each log represented another grueling trip to the timber stand, another day of cutting and dragging and lifting. Her hands, which had finally begun to heal, cracked open again. Blisters formed, broke, and hardened into calluses. Silas worked beside her now, with growing confidence. He mixed the clay that Alara used to chink the gaps between logs, carrying buckets of it from a deposit near the creek. He gathered the dried moss that served as insulation, filling entire sacks that he dragged back to the cave. He collected the dags, the dirty wool from the sheep's hindquarters, and helped pack it into the walls for extra warmth. The cabin took shape. 10 feet by 12 feet, a low sloping roof, one small window covered with oiled paper to let in light, a door that Alara built herself, fitting the planks together until they hung true. It was crude. It was simple. It was theirs. But one crucial element remained. The cabin needed a heart. It needed fire. A simple fire pit would fill the enclosed space with smoke, making it uninhabitable. She needed a stove, and she had no money to buy one. For days she puzzled over the problem, sketching diagrams in the dirt, consulting her mother's journal, lying awake at night trying to find a solution. The answer came from the cave itself. Ilara had noticed a thin vertical fissure in the cave ceiling, high above her chosen spot. It was perhaps 6 inches wide, running upward through the stone toward the surface. When she held a candle beneath it, the flame flickered. Air was moving through that crack. It led somewhere. If it led outside, it could serve as a natural chimney. She built a small, thick-walled hearth in the corner of the cabin, using clay and rocks mortared together with more clay. She found an old cracked iron pot among the debris from Hemlock's abandoned mining camp, and embedded it into the structure to serve as a durable fire chamber. Sheet metal, salvaged from the same debris, was hammered flat and bent into a crude stovepipe. The hard part was getting the pipe up to the fissure. She had to build a rickety scaffold of logs, climbing nearly 20 feet above the cabin roof. Perched precariously, heart pounding, she maneuvered the metal pipe into the crack in the ceiling. It slid into place as if made for it. The first test was a disaster. She lit a small fire, and thick, acrid smoke billowed back into the cabin instantly. Her eyes streamed. She coughed until her lungs burned. Scrambling, she threw dirt on the flames to smother them. Failure. She spent the next day cleaning soot from every surface and studying the problem. The draw was wrong. The pipe was not long enough to catch the natural draft from the fissure. She added another section of hammered tin, extending the pipe deeper into the crack. She sealed the joints with wet clay, smoothing every gap with her fingers. Second test. She lit the kindling and held her breath. Smoke rose from the fire. It curled upward, hesitated for one heart-stopping moment at the mouth of the pipe. And then it was gone, drawn up into the stone, vanishing into the fissure, rising through 20 feet of rock to emerge somewhere on the surface above. A steady, clean heat began to radiate from the clay stove. Ilara sat on the dirt floor of her cabin and wept with relief. That night, a predator came. Ilara was asleep in the cabin, exhausted from the day's triumph, when Flint's savage barking jerked her awake. The sound was different than his normal alert, more urgent, more afraid. She grabbed the lantern and rushed out into the main cavern. The sheep were panicked, crashing against the far side of their pen, bleating in terror. Their eyes rolled white in the darkness. Something had frightened them beyond reason. At the cave mouth, two green eyes glowed in the night. A cougar. The big cat crouched just beyond the reach of the moonlight, its tawny body low to the ground, muscles coiled. It was lean, hungry, driven to desperate measures by the dwindling game of approaching winter. It had smelled the sheep, and it had come to kill. Ilara's rifle was back in the cabin. Even if she could reach it, she was no marksman. A missed shot might provoke an attack. An injured cougar was more dangerous than a healthy one. She needed something else. Her eyes fell on the iron skillets, hung on a peg near the fire pit. She grabbed both of them and ran, not toward the cougar, not toward the entrance, but deeper into the cave, away from the entrance, into the vast stone chamber, and she began to bang them together. The sound was deafening, metal on metal, amplified by the stone walls, bouncing and echoing until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was not human. It was not animal. It was something else entirely. A chaotic, thundering roar that filled the cavern like the voice of an angry god. The green eyes vanished. Flint kept barking, but the immediate threat was gone. The cougar had fled, driven away not by weapons but by sound, by the terrifying, inexplicable noise that seemed to emerge from the rock itself. Ilara stood in the darkness, skillets still gripped in her trembling hands, breathing hard. She had protected her flock, not with violence but with understanding. The cave had acoustic properties that she could use. The stone was her ally. Behind her in the darkness, she heard something unexpected. Laughter. Silas was laughing. It was rusty, unpracticed, the laugh of someone who had almost forgotten how. But it was real. He stood near the sheep pen, one hand on Flint's collar, his thin body shaking with mirth. Ilara stared at him, and despite everything, despite the fear and the exhaustion and the weight of all they had lost, she started laughing too. The sound of their laughter echoed through the cave, filling the ancient space with something it had not held for millions of years. Joy. November brought visitors. Word had spread through Bitter Creek about the girl living in the cave. It was the kind of story people loved to tell over drinks, laughing about foolish youth and inevitable failure. Bets were placed at the saloon. Virgil Garrett, a young ranch hand with more bravado than sense, wagered $5 that she would give up before Christmas. Some came to gawk. They rode out to Hemlock's Folly expecting to find a desperate girl living in squalor, ready to admit defeat. Instead, they found a clean sheep pen, a working water system, and smoke rising from a crack in the rock above a cabin they could not even see. They left confused. Reverend Josiah Crane came next. The minister was a thin man with a narrow face and eyes that seemed to find sin everywhere he looked. He had heard about the girl's unusual methods and felt it his duty to investigate. These practices, he said, standing at the mouth of the cave. He could not quite bring himself to step inside. They smell of paganism, old country superstition. The girl needs spiritual guidance, not encouragement. He delivered a sermon the following Sunday about the dangers of straying from proper Christian ways. And he did not mention Alara by name, but everyone knew who he meant. Old Hamish McAllister heard the sermon and snorted loudly enough to wake the baby 2 pews over. Hamish was 75 years old, a Scottish immigrant who had worked the Montana ranges for half a century. His face was a map of wrinkles and weather, and his accent remained as thick as the day he left Edinburgh. After the service, he made the trip to Hemlock's Folly himself. Alara watched him approach with wariness. She had learned to be cautious around visitors. Most came to mock or preach or gloat. Few came to help. Hamish walked straight past her and into the cave. He examined the sheep pen with a critical eye. He studied the water collection system, tracing the gutters with one gnarled finger. He climbed the scaffold to look at the stovepipe connection. He said nothing through any of it. Finally, he emerged into the afternoon light and fixed Alara with a piercing stare. "Who taught you this, girl?" "My mother, and her grandmother, from Cornwall." Hamish nodded slowly, something like recognition in his weathered eyes. "The old ways. I have seen these methods in the Highlands when I was a boy. Stonework that kept families alive when everyone else froze." He paused. "They laughed at us too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Seeds. For spring. You will want a garden when the snow melts. These are hardy stock, bred for thin soil and short summers." He pressed the pouch into her hand. "The cave will keep you warm through winter," he said. "But come spring, you will need more than warmth. You will need food that grows." He walked away without another word. Pause and reflect. In a town full of skeptics and mockers, 2 people had shown kindness. Cordelia Briggs, Hamish McAllister. They did not ask for anything in return. They simply saw something worth helping, and they helped. But not everyone in Bitter Creek was so generous. One and the most dangerous person of all was about to make his move. Ezra Blackwood came 2 weeks later. He rode up on his finest horse, dressed in a thick wool coat that probably cost more than everything Alara owned combined. His face was set in a familiar expression of cold disapproval. Alara met him at the cave entrance, Flint growling softly at her side. Silas hung back in the shadows of the cave mouth, watching. Ezra did not waste time with pleasantries. "You are still here." "I did not expect that. I told you I would be." He dismounted and looked around. His eyes moved over the sheep pen, the neat stacks of firewood, the smoke trickling from the hidden chimney above. He had expected ruins. He found order, and it clearly displeased him. "This land is worthless." He said it as a statement of absolute fact. "You are wasting your time. I will give you back the $20 you paid, plus another $40 for your trouble. $60 total. And take the money and go somewhere suitable." Alara felt the anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "The land is not for sale, Mr. Blackwood." His eyes narrowed. "Do not be foolish, girl. Winter here will kill you. You have no experience, no resources, no. I have everything I need." Ezra's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being interrupted, especially by a 17-year-old girl who should have known her place. "Stubborn," he said quietly, "just like your mother." And the words hung in the air between them. For a moment, something flickered across the old man's face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. His eyes moved past Alara, toward the shadows where Silas stood watching, and his expression shifted in a way that Alara could not interpret. Then it was gone. "Have it your way," he mounted his horse. "But when the first blizzard hits, do not come crawling to me for help." He turned the horse and rode away without looking back. 3 days later, Alara found a section of the sheep pen fence cut clean through, 2 ropes severed with a sharp knife. Someone had been there in the night. Someone wanted her to fail. She repaired the fence, reinforced it with additional posts, and did not sleep well for a week. The threat was no longer just the weather or wild animals. It now had a human face. December arrived in shades of gray. The sky pressed low against the mountains, heavy with moisture that had not yet decided whether to fall as rain or snow. The air had a metallic taste, and animals behaved strangely. Birds flew south in sudden, panicked flocks. Deer that normally grazed near the cave vanished entirely. Old Hamish McAllister stopped by one afternoon, his weathered face more grave than usual. "You feel it, girl? The pressure?" Ilara nodded. Her ears had been aching for days, a dull pain that would not go away. "It will be bad." Hamish stared at the sky with the eyes of someone who had seen too much. "I have only seen this color once before, 60 winters ago. That storm killed 200 head of cattle and a dozen men." He looked at her. "Be ready." She was already preparing. Every day she added to her firewood supply until the stacks reached higher than her head. She reinforced the sheep pen with extra posts. She checked her water barrel, now half full with precious water collected drop by drop. She sealed every gap in the cabin walls with fresh clay, stuffed extra wool into every crack, prepared everything she could think of. Silas worked beside her with new purpose. He still did not speak, but he seemed to understand the urgency. He carried wood without being asked. He checked the sheep pen twice a day. He kept the water barrel covered to prevent evaporation. They were as ready as they could be. The first flakes began to fall on the afternoon of December 23rd. They were fat and wet, drifting lazily from the gray sky. Beautiful, almost. Ilara stood at the cave entrance and watched them settle on the scrub brush, turning the brown landscape white inch by inch. By dusk, the wind had arrived. It came from the north, howling across the mountains with a fury that Ilara had never experienced. The temperature plummeted. The gentle snowflakes became horizontal bullets, driven so hard they stung exposed skin. Visibility dropped to nothing. Ilara secured a heavy wooden barrier across the lower half of the cave entrance, enough to keep out the drifts while still allowing air to circulate. Then she retreated to the cabin, closed the door, and stoked the fire. The world outside vanished. For 3 days the blizzard raged. The wind shrieked and moaned, a living entity trying to claw its way into every shelter in the territory. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Drifts piled 15 feet high against anything that blocked the wind. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed flesh in minutes, cold enough to kill anyone caught outside in moments. And then, when everyone thought it must surely end, it grew worse. Day 4 brought temperatures that dropped even further. Day 5, the wind shifted, bringing fresh snow from the north in endless waves. Day 6, Ilara began rationing firewood, not because she was running low, but because she did not know when it would end. 7 days. The storm lasted 7 days. It was the worst blizzard Montana had seen in 40 years. Later, they would call it the White Death of '91. It killed 67 people across 4 counties. It destroyed thousands of head of livestock. It broke the spirits of men who had thought themselves unbreakable. But inside the cave, the sound was muffled. The stone walls absorbed the wind's fury, reducing it to a distant roar. The temperature in the main cavern dropped, but never below freezing. And the massive limestone, which had absorbed the earth's warmth for millions of years, refused to surrender it now. The sheep huddled together, uncomfortable but alive. And inside the cabin, it was warm. The clay stove radiated steady heat, pushing back the chill that seeped through the stone. Ilara and Silas sat together, wrapped in blankets, while Flint dozed at their feet. The firelight danced on the wooden walls, creating shadows that seemed almost alive. Ilara told stories to fill the silence. She told Silas about their mother, about Cornwall, about the great-grandmother who had survived storms even worse than this in the tin mines of England. She told him about their father, about his dreams, about the day he had first seen this land and known it was special. "This land," she said quietly, watching the flames. He knew about this cave. He wanted to buy it. He wanted to build something here that could protect us from anything. On the 5th night, with the wind still howling outside, Silas moved closer to her. His lips parted. A sound came out, rusty and broken, like a door that had not been opened in years. Elara. She froze. I miss them, his voice cracked. I miss Mama. I miss Papa. Elara pulled him close, tears streaming down her face. I know, she whispered. I miss them too. They held each other while the storm raged, two orphans in a cave, finally able to share their grief. Silas had been silent for 6 months, but in that moment, wrapped in his sister's arms, he found his voice again. He would never lose it after that. 7 days. The worst blizzard in 40 years had tried to kill everything in its path. Trees had fallen, livestock had frozen, people had died. But in a cave that everyone called worthless, two orphans and their dog had slept warm and safe. And a boy who had not spoken in 6 months had finally found his voice. The question now was what had happened to everyone else. The first visitor arrived on the 8th day after the storm began. Elara was outside clearing snow from the cave entrance when she saw movement on the white horizon. A dark shape, moving slowly, struggling through drifts that reached chest-high in places. Flint growled, then stopped. His tail wagged uncertainly. The shape resolved into a figure on horseback. The horse was exhausted, steam rising from its flanks, picking its way through the snow with painful care. The rider slumped in the saddle. As they drew closer, Elara recognized him. Ezra Blackwood. But not the Ezra Blackwood she had known. This man looked older, diminished. His expensive coat was crusted with ice. His face, usually so hard and controlled, was gaunt and gray. He moved like someone who had not slept in days, or perhaps someone who had seen things he could not unsee. He stopped his horse at the cave entrance and sat there, staring. His eyes moved over the scene. The sheep, visible just inside the cave, alive and well. The smoke rising from the hidden chimney. On the two children, healthy and pink-cheeked, standing in the snow with their dog, he had expected to find corpses. You are alive! His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. We are. Silence. The horse stamped and snorted, eager to get out of the cold. Finally, Ezra spoke again. I lost 300 head of cattle, half my herd frozen in the fields. We could not get to them in time. 2 of my men died trying to save them, Henry Kowalski and old Pete Simmons, dead before we could reach them. My frozen solid not 100 yards from the bunkhouse. Elara said nothing. What was there to say? My barn collapsed, the north one, where we kept the horses, the weight of the snow. The whole structure just went down in the night. Ezra's voice cracked. We barely got the animals out. Some of them we did not get out at all. He looked at her, and something in his expression broke. My wife is ill. The cold got into her lungs. The doctor says she may not survive the week. He paused. I have 12 people on my ranch who need shelter. My main house is damaged. The chimney collapsed. There is nowhere for them to go. His next words cost him everything he had left. I need help. May we come here? Elara stared at her grandfather. This man who had thrown money at her feet like she was a beggar. This man who had told her she was nothing. This man who had probably sent someone to cut her fence, to frighten her, to drive her away. She could say no. He deserved to hear no. Well, he deserved to feel what she had felt, standing on his porch, begging for scraps of family kindness. But she thought about her mother. Margaret had chosen love over revenge. She had walked away from wealth and never looked back, never tried to hurt the father who had hurt her. She had built a life based on what she could give, not what she could take. Elara opened her mouth. Bring them, she said. The cave is big enough for everyone. They came that afternoon, 23 people in total, when arriving in groups of 3 and 4, bundled in every piece of clothing they owned. Some rode horses, some came on foot. Children, red-faced and frightened, clung to their mothers' hands. Old men hobbled through the snow with the last of their strength. And in the back of a wagon wrapped in blankets, Ezra's wife. Helena Blackwood was 62 years old. She had been beautiful once, and traces of that beauty remained in her high cheekbones and delicate features. But illness had hollowed her out. Her breathing was shallow and labored, each breath a struggle against lungs that were slowly filling with fluid. Elara directed the newcomers into the cave. They stared at everything. The sheep pen, the water system, the cabin tucked into the back, smoke curling from its hidden chimney. They had expected a hole in the ground. They found something closer to a fortress. The main chamber was large enough for everyone, though cramped. Ilara organized sleeping areas. He designated spaces for the children to play, established rules about the fire and the water supply. Silas helped without being asked, moving through the crowd with quiet efficiency. The temperature in the cave held steady, protected by millions of tons of stone that had been absorbing the earth's warmth since before humans walked this land. Cold enough to need blankets and body heat, but warm enough to survive, warm enough to heal. The newcomers could not stop marveling. "How is it so warm?" One woman asked. "It should be freezing in here." "We are underground," Alara explained. "The earth holds its warmth. The stone moderates the temperature, keeps it constant year-round. My great-grandmother discovered this in the tin mines of Cornwall." They listened with new respect. That night, Alara brought food to Helena Blackwood. The old woman lay on a makeshift bed near the cabin, where the stove's warmth could reach her. Her breathing had eased somewhat in the warmer air. Her eyes, cloudy with fever, focused on Alara's face. "You look like her," Helena whispered. "Like Margaret." Ilara knelt beside her. "You knew my mother? I knew her." A tear traced down Helena's weathered cheek. "She was my daughter, the only one I ever had. When Ezra sent her away, I wanted to go after her. I wanted to choose her. But I was weak. I stayed." Her hand, thin and papery, reached for Ilara's. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." Ilara held her grandmother's hand and said nothing. What could she say? The damage was done. The years were lost. But here, in this moment, there was something. A connection, an acknowledgement. Helena fell asleep holding her granddaughter's hand. On the second night in the cave, Ezra Blackwood found Ilara sitting alone near the water barrel, watching the slow drip of water into the half-full container. He stood there for a long moment, his proud frame somehow smaller in the dim light. "I was wrong." Ilara looked up. "I was wrong," he repeated. His voice broke on the words. "Not just about this cave, about your mother, about everything." He lowered himself onto a rock, his joints creaking, his face haggard. "When Margaret left, I told myself she would come crawling back. I told myself she would realize her mistake and beg for forgiveness. I waited. I waited 18 years, and she never came." His hands trembled in his lap. "Because she was not wrong. I was. She found happiness with nothing, and I had everything, and was miserable. I was too proud to admit it, too stubborn to reach out, and now she is gone, and I can never tell her." Ilara sat in silence, letting him speak. "Your father," he continued, his voice barely audible. "Thomas, I investigated him years ago. I wanted to find something wrong with him, something I could use to bring Margaret back." He looked up, his eyes wet. "I found nothing. He was a good man, poor but good, better than me." A long pause. "I sent someone to cut your fence. After I visited, or after you refused my money, I wanted you to fail. I wanted to prove that you were weak, that you needed me. It was cruel and petty, and I am ashamed." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. This belonged to Helena's mother. It should have gone to Margaret. It should have been passed down years ago. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth by generations of wear. A family heirloom that had survived journeys across oceans, through wars, across frontiers. "I would like you to have it. Not as payment, not as apology. Those words are worthless now. Just have it." Ilara took the box. She looked at the ring, at the years of history it represented. Her grandmother's grandmother had worn this ring. It had crossed the Atlantic in the pocket of an immigrant who had nothing else to her name. And now it had come home. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ezra nodded once, then rose and walked away, his shoulders bent under the weight of a lifetime of regret. The storm had killed 67 people across 4 counties. Thousands of cattle had frozen in the fields, hundreds of horses, countless sheep and chickens and pigs. Barns had collapsed under the weight of snow. Houses had lost their roofs. The economic damage would take years to repair, and some families would never recover. But in Alara's cave, no one had died. Not a single person. Not a single animal. When the snow finally began to melt and the roads became passable again, the story spread. It passed from ranch to ranch, from town to town, growing with each telling. The cave girl, the orphan who had built a shelter in a place everyone said was worthless. The girl who had saved 23 lives using knowledge that came from the other side of the world. Marcus Tully was one of the first to apologize. "I called you a fool," he said, standing at the cave entrance, hat in hand. "I bet against you. I laughed at you in my store." He looked at the ground. I was the fool. Reverend Crane came next, his narrow face pale with something that might have been shame. "I spoke against you from the pulpit. I called your methods pagan superstition." He swallowed. "I was wrong. God works in many ways. Perhaps this was one of them." Virgil Garrett paid his $5 bet without being asked. "You earned it," he said simply, "and a lot more besides." But it was the Blackwoods who changed the most. Helena survived. The warm air of the cave, the rest, the absence of the brutal cold that had ravaged her lungs gave her body the chance it needed to fight back. It was a slow recovery, measured in weeks rather than days. But by February, she was sitting up. By March, she was walking short distances. By April, she was visiting the cave every week, bringing food and supplies and the quiet company of a grandmother who had finally found her grandchildren. Ezra changed too, though more slowly. He did not become a different man overnight. The hardness was too deep, the habits too ingrained. But something had cracked in him during those days in the cave. Something had let light in. He began visiting Silas. The boy spoke now, though he remained quiet by nature. Ezra would sit with him for hours talking about horses, about the land, about the father Silas had lost. He taught the boy to ride, patient and gentle in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew him before. And slowly, session by session, conversation by conversation, the wounds began to heal. Spring came late that year, but it came. The snow melted. The creek swelled with runoff. Green shoots pushed through the brown earth, and Alara's sheep, safe and healthy, through the worst winter in memory, began to lamb. She sold her first flock that April. 5 lambs, strong and healthy, bought by a rancher from 2 counties over who had heard the story of the cave. The price was fair, more than fair, because the rancher wanted to support the girl who had proven everyone wrong. With the money, Alara bought better tools. A proper bed for the cabin, coffee beans, a luxury she had not tasted since her mother died. The garden she planted with Hamish's seeds grew slowly in the thin soil, but it grew. Potatoes, turnips, hardy greens that could survive the Montana climate. More people came to learn. They wanted to know about the water system, about the stove, and about the principles that had kept the cave warm when everything else froze. Alara taught them freely, just as her mother had taught her. The knowledge was not hers to hoard. It belonged to everyone who needed it. Within 2 years, 7 families had built shelters based on her design. Some used natural caves. Others dug into hillsides. All of them used the principles she shared, the ancient wisdom that had traveled from Cornwall to Montana across generations and oceans. She was 19 years old now. She had land. She had livestock. She had family again, broken and healing, but real. She had proven that the thing everyone laughed at was the thing that saved them. But Alara's story was not over. The best part was still to come. 10 years passed. Elara Whitmore became Alara Blackwood, not through marriage but through reconciliation. When Helena died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, she left instructions for Alara and Silas to be formally recognized as heirs. Ezra, now 80 years old and finally at peace with his past, supported the decision. When he died the following year, he was buried next to his daughter Margaret in the small family plot on the Blackwood Ranch. The gravestone he had ordered years before, the one that had marked Margaret as dead since her wedding day, was finally replaced with the truth. Margaret Blackwood Whitmore, beloved daughter, beloved mother, 1849 to 1891. Elara stood at the grave on the day of the dedication, Silas beside her. Her brother was 23 now, a man grown. The silent boy who had retreated into himself after their parents' death had become something none of them expected, a voice for others. Silas had become a mining engineer, combining the traditional knowledge their mother had passed down with modern techniques he learned at the Colorado School of Mines. But more than that, he had become a teacher. A, he traveled across Montana and Wyoming, showing families how to build shelters that could withstand any storm. My sister saved my life twice, he would tell them, once when she built the cave, and once when she refused to give up on me. He married a school teacher named Catherine in 1903. They had 4 children, and every one of them knew the stories of Cornwall, of the tin mines, of the grandmother who had taught them how to read the stone. And the silence that had consumed him as a boy never returned. Silas Whitmore Blackwood became one of the most respected engineers in the territory, and everything he built was designed to protect families just like the one he had almost lost. The cave at Hemlock's Folly, no longer called by that mocking name, had become something more than a shelter. It had become a testament. Elara lived there for the rest of her life. She never married. She said once that she had found her partner in the stone itself, in the land that had saved her when no one else would. It was a strange kind of love, but it was real. She expanded the cabin over the years. Additional rooms, better furnishings, a proper chimney system that visitors said was more efficient than anything money could buy. But the core remained the same, the small wooden structure that a desperate 17-year-old had built with bleeding hands and stubborn will. A. Flint died in 1905 at the age of 14. Elara buried him at the mouth of the cave, where he had always liked to lie in the afternoon sun, watching the world go by with his intelligent, faithful eyes. She marked the spot with a flat stone, carved with simple words. Flint. Good dog, good friend. She got another dog eventually, then another. But none of them were quite the same. First loves never are. Elara lived to see the 20th century. She lived to see automobiles replace horses on the roads she had once walked barefoot. She lived to see electricity come to Montana, though she never bothered to wire the cave. She lived to see 2 world wars and the Great Depression and the birth of the modern nation that she had helped, in her small way, to build. She never left the cave. Oh, she traveled. She visited Silas in Butte, where he had established his engineering practice. She attended her nieces' and nephews' weddings, and as watching the family grow that had once been so close to extinction. She saw the ocean once, on a trip to California that she talked about for years afterward, but she always came home. The cave was where she belonged. The stone knew her. The water still dripped its patient rhythm into barrels that had been replaced only once in over 50 years. The sheep, descendants of that original flock of 10, still grazed the land that everyone had said was worthless. In her final years, Elara wrote her own journal, continuing the tradition her great-grandmother had started generations before. She recorded temperatures and techniques. She drew diagrams. She noted what worked and what did not. On the last page, dated 3 days before her death, she wrote this: "When I was 17, they laughed at me. Worthless land, they said. Foolish girl, they said. She will die in that hole before spring. I did not die. I built. I survived. I raised my brother and reconciled with a grandfather who had forgotten how to love. I watched this cave become a refuge, a school, a legend. And now, at 88 years old, I can say this with certainty. The things that others dismiss are often the things that save us. The knowledge that keeps us alive comes from those who survived before us. And sometimes the hole in the ground that everyone laughs at becomes the fortress that saves them all." Elara Whitmore Blackwood died on April 17th, 1962, at the age of 88. She was found in her bed, in the cabin she had built with her own hands, in the cave that everyone said was worthless. The stove was still warm. The water barrel was still catching its slow, steady drips. The sheep pen, rebuilt a dozen times over the decades, still stood solid and true. She was buried next to Flint at the mouth of the cave, where the afternoon sun fell golden on the stone. Her marker was simple, as she had requested. Elara Whitmore Blackwood, 1874 to 1962. She built a home from stone, and from stone she built hope. Epilogue: The Cave Today. The Montana Historical Society preserved the cave in 1965. It stands today much as Elara left it. The cabin is still there, protected from the elements by the stone that surrounds it. The water collection system still works, still dripping its patient rhythm into a barrel that has been replaced only once in over a century. Now researchers from Montana State University visited in 1978 to study its construction. They measured temperatures. They analyzed the water collection system. They documented everything with the precision of scientists who had discovered something they did not expect. Their conclusions confirmed what Alara had known for decades. The cave maintained a constant temperature year-round. The thermal mass of the limestone moderated external temperature swings exactly as her great-grandmother's journal had predicted. The water collection system, though crude by modern standards, was based on sound geological principles that engineers still employ today. Ancient wisdom, the lead researcher wrote in his paper, validated by modern science. Visitors come from around the world now. They walk through the main chamber, marveling at the constant temperature. Next, they examine the ingenious stove system, the carefully designed ventilation. They read the plaques that explain how a 17-year-old orphan, using knowledge passed down through generations, built something that outlasted everything around it. But the thing that moves them most is always the grave, the flat stone, worn smooth by years of weather, where visitors have left flowers and coins and letters. The words carved there, simple and true, and next to it, another stone, smaller, older, almost illegible now. Flint. Good dog, good friend. They stand there, these visitors, and they think about what it means to be underestimated, to be laughed at, to be told that your dreams are foolish and your knowledge is worthless. And then they think about what it means to prove everyone wrong. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with work, with patience, with faith in the things your grandmother taught you, even when the whole world says she was foolish. The cave is still there, and the stone is still there. And the story keeps being told, passed down through generations, just like the knowledge that made it all possible. If this story has taught us anything, it is this. The things that save us are often the things that others dismiss. The knowledge that keeps us alive comes from those who survived before us. And sometimes the hole in the ground that everyone laughs at becomes the fortress that saves them all. Alara Whitmore did not set out to prove anyone wrong. She set out to survive. She set out to protect her brother. She set out to honor the mother who had given her everything, including the wisdom to see value where others saw only stone. The rest was just a matter of not giving up. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. The end.